Hello, wonderful humans. Thank you for joining Radical Relating on Substack, where we get to have conversations on liberatory love and rewilding intimacy. My name is Mel. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, a relationship coach, and published author. And I specialize in working with the queer and questioning and those who love them who are exploring consensual non-monogamy. And today I am joined by my wonderful friend and colleague, Jess Jackson, they, who is a licensed massage therapist, a somatic experiencing practitioner, a safe and sound protocol provider, and a trauma-informed educator and business mentor for healers and helpers. Jess draws from lived experience as a survivor and extensive trauma-informed studies, and she is a forever student of the nervous system, neuroscience, healing justice, and somatic practice. Jess and I have followed each other on social media for many years, and then we ended up in somatic experiencing training together. And we're both like,
Yes.
I love you. I love you. Great. So I'm so excited to have you here, Jess. And we decided to do this because we want to talk about polyvagal theory and all of
Yeah.
this stuff. So why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about what exactly falls under that umbrella of polyvagal theory?
Yes. So polyvagal theory is a theory. That's the important part. People forget that it's only a theory. But created by Dr. Stephen Porges, Stephen with a P and an H. Um and it talks about how our nervous system responds and reacts to stress and trauma, and how our nervous system responds and reacts to like safety and connection and attunement. And if you are familiar with fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all those F's, a lot of that falls under the umbrella of polyvagal theory. If you've ever seen, the graphic of the nervous system ladder, that's a polyvagal thing. And window of tolerance is a different model, but similar approach, just like helping us to have a framework for why our nervous system does what it does when we're trying to survive something, and get through something, and also when we're triggered.
Mhm.
So this can happen like even when the danger has passed, but perhaps our nervous system or body, so wise, doesn't always remember that. And I just want to say, because I would hope this would be obvious, but it's well, okay, and now I'm getting ahead of ourselves, Mel, because I know you know this about me, but just that I don't subscribe to trauma always being in the past. A lot of us are moving through ongoing trauma, big, small, in between. So I think that can be even beyond polyvagal. There can be this lens and viewpoint in trauma healing that the bad thing already happened. And like the bad thing is happening for a lot of people. So I just want to drop that in at the top.
I love that you named that right at the top because I think that's one of the places where you and I connected in the somatic training of, you know,
Hmm.
and obviously both of us love somatic experiencing, but one of the limitations that I find, and I think that you have found too, is that a lot of it presupposes that trauma is something in the past or was like
Hmm.
events of the past, whether it was single
Yeah.
or complex series of events. And it hasn't historically done enough to address the fact that we can be in ongoing continuous trauma. And
Hmm.
the experience of systemic trauma in the body is very different. And I'm going to pin that as something I want to talk about.
Yeah.
But to go back to polyvagal, yeah, and it is a theory, or even more so than a theory, it's a hypothesis.
Hmm.
Because it has not been scientifically proven within the scientific frameworks. So
Hmm.
to prove a theory or hypothesis, you have to be able to do all these different trials and different studies. And
Yeah.
it was based on observations and knowledge of the nervous system, just from what we know. And, we think we know everything about the body, but we don't.
Hmm. Hmm.
We're still learning things about the body. And so there's a lot of information that comes to us, not from modern science, but from ancient indigenous wisdom and
Yeah.
practices. And then a lot of, modern practitioners are inspired by that and go, well, let's play with this and see how it informs what we do. And I mean,
Hmm.
I will always go on this rant about somatics in modern day is really poor at tracking its own lineage and history. because
Mhm.
modern day somatics, it starts with Thomas Hanna and Eleanor Criswell doing somatic movement work. And they were using, neurofeedback monitors and heart rate, all these different things to monitor what happens when we slow movement down, when we're moving with intent. And
Mhm.
they were using yoga principles to kind of figure that out. And then, we have somatics then applied into a psychological field when Peter Levine comes along. And so, modern day somatics is kind of like this hodgepodge of all these different pieces. And
Mhm.
polyvagal exists separately from somatics, but they have become very intertwined, I
Yeah.
think, because it offers us a framework through which to understand what the F we're actually doing in a somatic
Yeah.
session.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I know that the safe and sound protocol that you do has, I think, a little more of inspiration from polyvagal. Is that right?
Yeah, because Stephen Porges, who created polyvagal theory, created the safe and sound protocol. And I won't get into the weeds of polyvagal theory, but if you did a Google search, you can find that it's about the different branches of our nervous system, the autonomic nervous system and the central nervous system. It's about the vagus nerve. And the safe and sound protocol is a healing playlist. Not in the way that people think. It's not like traditional or more indigenous or ancient sound healing. But it's a healing playlist that is designed to support these different branches of our nervous system. So yeah, it's really been an interesting time to have more backlash conversation, ongoing testing if the proof is in the pudding of like, science is happening in real time and that people are refuting what Stephen Porges has proposed, and then he's actually not like clapping back, but responding. I mean, like, we're seeing science in real time unfolding, and it's been really interesting because, yeah, it's a huge part of what I do with the safe and sound protocol. Although I always fuck a little bit with the polyvagal theory when applied. Um, I don't I okay, can I just say, like, I don't actually think that it's a super problematic theory. I think a lot of people have decided that it's a super problematic theory. I think it can be problematic depending on how it's offered or applied.
Yes. And I
I mean,
think,
and
like,
I feel like I'm not gonna be radical enough for some people that I'm like, but it's just it has helped my clients so much in understanding their nervous system, and it wouldn't help them if I was offering it in this really narrow way where one of the misgivings, it's not the right word. One of the shortcomings of polyvagal theory is that it's in a vacuum. It's like all of it is happening right here in our nervous system, but our nervous system is in our body. Our body is in the world and in our life, in our little life, in the big life. And so I like to offer it and really get expansive around it. And I like to bend the ladder a bit for folks I work with too, because I work mostly with neurodivergent complex trauma survivors, and, like, our relationship with safe and social and ventral, it's like, that's not a comfy space for a lot of us to be. Maybe we're more comfy in freeze. Um, but yeah, I it's a little bit of a weird moment for me because I'm the first one to critique all of these things that I do. Somatic experiencing included, SSB included, polyvagal theory included. And yeah, like, I think maybe you and I are a bit similar in this way. Like, there's value in them and they really help a lot of folks like change their lives. So I still offer them. So I feel in the both and camp
yeah,
of this polyvagal moment,
I
and
would
I might
I
get
would
in trouble.
this is a safe place to get in trouble.
Okay,
I
great.
I would agree with you, and I think that polyvagal has suffered from similar, what's happened to similar things like attachment theory and other stuff where it's like we've gotten this social media quick snippet Instagram reel version of things,
Mhm.
and then we think that's the whole picture. And people are familiar with fight and flight. Some people are familiar with freeze. And there's the whole other thing about fawning, which isn't part of polyvagal. But then, we go, is that a state in the nervous system? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
And which could be a whole conversation in itself.
it could
And I
be.
think that because we get these, very condensed, small snippets of things as a general public, we come away with a very limited understanding when it's actually, I mean, like it's a lot of hours of training to understand how to work with this system.
Hmm.
And and I love that it's not a static thing. Like you said, science is happening in real time. More things have been added to polyvagal through the years as new information
Hmm.
comes to light. And I think that is super fascinating. And for me in my somatic work, I always try to go, how can I move away from the jargon and the buzzwords? Because I feel like the buzzwords start to lose their meaning after a while.
Hmm.
And so I play with it in terms of, rather than talking about like, oh, this is your ventral vagal system and this is your dorsal vagal and this is your sympathetic, which I know that it is. Um,
Uh-huh.
I will talk about like, let's look at where you're mobilized. What's the mobilization?
Yeah.
Because that sympathetic nervous system, what it is there's more energy running through your body and it wants your body to move. Okay, does
Hmm.
your body want to move your legs so that you can walk away from a situation? Does your body want to move your arms so that you can fight off something? Um, and that, when we're in ventral vagal, that's connection, that's
Yeah.
engagement. And
Yeah.
then we're
We
looking
get
at,
to move towards.
and I mean, what always blows my mind is that in a somatic session, when someone starts to come back into more ventral vagal connection, they report feeling warmth in their face, energy along their chest, tingles down their
Hmm.
arms. And that is
Mm.
exactly the areas that the ventral vagal nerve invigorates. So,
Yeah.
anecdotally, observationally, we can see it at work.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then I started playing with, when we look at dorsal vagal, which is, the freeze. I'm like, that is because we get so overwhelmed. And sometimes I tell people it's like the blue screen of death on your computer. You had too many tabs of processing open, and
Mm-hmm.
your nervous system is like, we cannot. Um,
Yeah.
but that state is very similar to rest, right? So we can go into freeze, but we can move from freeze into rest and digest. We can kind of, and so it's like there's two different sides of that dorsal state going on, and how do we move from one to the other?
Yeah.
And there's all the hybrid states that come in as well. It's like you're not
Yes.
just in one gear at one time. You can have a lot of connection and you can be mobilized because, like right
Hmm.
now, we're excited to talk to each other.
Yeah. I have also tingles down my arms too. So as you were talking about what your clients experience, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to validate what you're saying. Like some people find freeze is the more comfortable place to be.
Yeah.
And I've been working a lot with folks who have complex trauma histories, and I come from a complex trauma history too. And I think so many of us have felt like, oh, I have to regulate. I have, and that feeling of regulation means I have to be calm.
Yeah, can we talk about this?
Yes.
Because that's, like, I think the one of the most problematic not that's one of the most problematic ways someone can use something like polyvagal theory just to and I think you and I have talked about this a little bit in terms of somatic experiencing too, where I think this is a super, like, white, Western white supremacy, just calm down. And just don't be too much and be really compliant, and I think, one of my other favorite practitioners, Sage Hayes, is really this is, like, their world too in how can we, get the juicy, helpful bits out of practices like somatic experiencing and then also wonder, like, what's like, healing for who? Calm for who?
Mhm.
Regulated for why?
Mhm.
And when I'm doing my safe and sound protocol groups, I think on every single connection call and then throughout our weeks together, like, I'm always trying to let folks know, like, yeah, there's a gift for my folks in that they come in super anxious and hypervigilant. And just like you were naming before, maybe they can't quite rest because they end up being in a dorsal swampland, or they're in that freeze where it's like, I'm stuck, but I'm buzzy and I'm not resting, but I'm still. Um, oh, I lost my train of thought. Just that, like, it's great. It's so beautiful for them to be able to access really restorative rest.
Mhm.
And also the flip side, I think is so important that like usually slash always when we're coming into a mobilized response, when we're holding up a boundary to say no, or when we want to and it's not safe enough to, like where does that get to be expressed? So I
Mhm.
feel like polyvagal theory itself, I mean, we've already touched on how pretty much a lot of these modern westernized healing practices are thefted. So that's a whole problematic piece. But beyond that, I think one of the most harmful interpretations of nervous system healing is this emphasis on always downregulating. And ironically, sometimes to downregulate, you have to be able to move through a wave and then you'll
Yeah.
naturally come down. Like, this is what the nervous system does. And we're trying to squash something that wants to make a move. So I'm super, and now I'm shivery again, but I'm super passionate about this piece. Like, can your no be in the room?
Mhm.
And mobilizing, like, do you want to move away? Do you want to move towards?
Mhm.
And untangling some of that because we can just have a lot of shame, I think, um, when the brilliant ways we've survived can become pathologized and people are like, well, stop doing that, just downregulate. And then people can't, because that's not what the nervous system wants to do. It, like, needs to get really big before it comes down to rest.
Well, and even those terms like fight and flight are very, judgmental, I find. And I tell
Mm,
people, I'm like, it's not about fight. Fight, like, there's a spectrum of response in there. Fight might
mhm.
be the extreme, but what you're actually doing is asserting yourself. And, for
Yeah.
me, coming from, like, I mean, my mom is Greek and grew up in Venezuela, and there's a lot of feistiness in there.
Uh-huh.
And we would when we'd go to the airport to wait for my grandmother arriving from Athens, we would look and you could tell when the Greeks would arrive because the Greeks sound like they're arguing all the time. And, and this is
Mhm.
because the Greeks are very self-assertive. And I think through the white Western, ears, so to speak, we hear that self-assertion as aggression because we
Yes.
have this baseline in white supremacy of, like, your emotions have to be very minimal and neutral
Uh,
and, like,
uh-huh.
underexpressed. I always think of the was it Sense and Sensibility movie with,
Mhm.
Emma Thompson and Hugh Grant? I can't watch that movie because the emotions are so suppressed.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so, yeah, like, fight is not about fight. Fight is about self-assertion. Flight is not about avoidance. It's
Mm,
about, I need to preserve myself. I need to take a break. I need to step away. And I
mhm.
tell people we don't have functional wings. I mean, I have a tattoo of wings on my back, but they don't work. We have legs, we have feet, we have ways of
Yeah.
moving our we have locomotion techniques to move our bodies away from danger or from threat, or from
Mhm.
overwhelm and stress. And the challenge is when we repress those. When we repress those,
Mm.
then that lands in the body. And, for me as a former body worker, and I know you must see this as well, we can tell, right? We can tell when something's been locked in the body. It's like this pattern of tension corresponds to your body wanted to spring away from something, or your body wanted to defend yourself or assert yourself, and you never
Uh-huh.
got to do that because somebody told you you're not allowed to do that here.
Mhm.
And that's where I think that, understanding what we have with polyvagal becomes so amazing in somatic work because it gives us an insight to find a way through. And it's not like there's a map that says this is always the way from A to B. Everybody is different.
Yep.
And, the highly mobilized states that we can be in when we live with marginalization stress. Like I think of,
Mhm.
when we are queer, when we're trans, people who are non-white, people in
Yeah.
large bodies, people who live with disability, any kind of marginalization, there's a level of vigilance that we have to have
Yes.
because we are always having to assert ourselves and take up space in a world that or in a culture, in a paradigm that doesn't want you there. And so
Mhm.
that necessitates mobilization. And what I've observed is that slowing that down before there's enough of a support around it, or when there isn't enough of a safe container, feels way more terrifying, because
Mhm.
the nervous system goes, I'm not doing anything. How did I stop? Oh my God, I turned off the vigilance. Ah.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, being able to actually go, "No, what if it's all right for us to hang out in this mobilized state of self-assertion for a while?
Mhm.
What if it's okay for us to listen to that impulse to leave and move and flee? What if it's okay for us to listen to that impulse right now to just shut down away from connection when that tip over into freeze happens? What
Yeah.
if we allow ourselves to honor that in a way that isn't disruptive? But when we honor that, then what becomes possible? So like you said, like
Mhm.
completing those cycles.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I think there's another piece in here that keeps singing out to me of also unshaming that, like, so many folks wonder, well, why didn't I? And why didn't I fight back? And why didn't I leave? And what if? And I think, like, it's can be such like a liberating process to be able to see the arc of mobilization through, to be able to have a no, um, to be able to move your eyes from the other person, like in these small ways that can feel quite big. And I find also unshaming some of the internalized collapse when we're really braced, as if we're really our muscle chain is lighting up, because we wanna say no, and then we can't, and it comes in and ultimately can be really painful to carry. But
Mhm.
I think it could be so important, to unshame that. And I also find polyvagal theory helps my people, like, "Oh, that's what was happening in my nervous system, that's what I was wanting." And because it couldn't happen, but it's alive in me and it had to go somewhere, and often, yeah, like you're saying, we carry it. And I find that can be just such a balm for folks who feel a lot of shame, which I think so many survivors, um, we don't have control or agency, and so we can turn to ourselves thinking, "Well, I'll solve for this, or my body will solve for this, or my nervous system will solve for this." And so to explore these different pathways of finding safety through polyvagal theory or whatever lens resonates can help survivors to know, like, "Yeah, I did that to the best of my abilities, and it wasn't all up to me. I did everything I could, and that's, like, one small pocket." Which is why I'm always thinking about plopping the ladder, um, in the web of our marginalizations and our privileges.
Mhm.
And yeah, that feels like a powerful piece to me too. And sometimes that can help to really soften the way we're holding our experience in present day time, which ironically, when we can accept a little bit, that's when the mobilization can happen too, which is something I love about the work. Like, no agenda is
Yeah.
very helpful.
And what you're saying about the framework of it, like, I think about how when trauma happens, it's very often that too much is happening, we're asked to move on too quickly, everything's too
Yeah.
fast, it all becomes this, like, gnarly mess. And
Hmm.
to be able to integrate trauma, we have to be able to make sense of it, right? And that's why we have, like, flashbacks and why we keep going back to certain moments, because there's a part of our subconscious that is still processing what actually just happened to me. And when we don't have the words or a framework for understanding the inner experience, then the inner experience stays kind of muddied and jumbled up. And, I as someone who grew up with a practice of yoga and Shaivism, like, I feel fortunate that I've always had something that gave me a framework for understanding that. But I feel like I've got more tools now, knowing things about polyvagal, knowing things about somatic experiencing, to be able to go, oh, that's what my nervous system was doing.
Yeah.
It was just overwhelmed, and it was doing the best it could to try and keep me safe in that moment,
Hmm.
because this is where it was. It was my nervous system. It was responding to this thing. And without that framework of polyvagal, I would have a very different relationship to certain moments in my trauma
Uh-huh.
experience. And so I think having that framework, like once you can map it in yourself and through things like somatic experiencing, we get to actually go, oh, that's what it is. That's what it feels like when I'm actually in connection and not just faking it. Oh my God,
Mhm.
this is so different. I think that then becomes the tool that helps us to be better resourced and resilient in the moment because we now have this we're carrying that self-awareness with us, right? and
Mhm.
and that's where like my heart breaks when I see people saying like, oh, throw out polyvagal, because I'm like, to me that sounds like you're denying a very valuable tool that helps us develop that self-awareness, that helps us to be more
Mhm.
clear in our self relationship. And I have questions of the people who lead these critiques of like what's your agenda here? Like what are you trying to push?
Mhm.
Because the reality is we live in a world where the wellness industry is not always got the best intentions going on.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I think there's also that like, they're coming from a very Western scientific lens. And
Yeah.
and so we have to question, okay, what part of that is coming from like a white supremacist space
Right.
that says, if it's not written in stone, if we don't have all the documentation, then there's absolutely no validity to it. When
Yeah.
we see day in, day out, on a very practical way, when we do this thing, it works. We may not
Mhm.
understand all the ins and outs of why it works, but we know that it works.
Mhm. I'm so glad you brought that in because this piece is just has been on my mind so much. Yeah, who gets to decide what's valid and what's helpful? What's whose standards are we holding this to? And it's not I'm not anti-science, but I am always questioning. Um, yeah, it's a really interesting world to it's just a really interesting world to be, this healing work. It's like really magical in a way that I think goes beyond the science. And I find the science important. And it's just very interesting for me to be thinking about while I'm doing the work in real time. And also, like, what is it like to have a decolonial approach to polyvagal theory, which
Mhm.
I feel like I've I've really done a lot of shaping around polyvagal theory, so I feel pretty like I offer it in a pretty, intersectional and, um, inclusive and affirming way, but I feel like I just have so much room as, like, a white femme queer practitioner who is holding a lot of modalities where it's a old white man, but I know it didn't start with an old white man, so this is just I it's a little bit, it's just interesting in real time to be in the work and seeing how it's unfolding and what this might spark because I do think like the white Western healing and trauma world, we have a lot of work to do. Um, we have a lot of work to do when it comes to theft of lineages and also just having a more um realistic approach because somatics really presupposes a lot. And I think this is a lot of people's issue with polyvagal theory is that in a way it presupposes safety exists
Yeah.
and it presupposes where safety exists. And for
Mhm.
somatic experiencing, it can presuppose that you can find safety in your body. Or, I mean, and it's been, we trained, I think, along in the same time, like we both recently became SEPs. And in a way, I think it's a gift to be doing this work now, where when I went to school for massage therapy, these were not the conversations that we were having, and now we know there's work to do, but,
Yeah.
like, it's happening, and maybe a little slower than we would like, but I'm really glad, to be in the work at this time where we're, like, not just moving forward, but also looking back, hopefully more, you know, res
Yeah. And I would say that for me, like safety is part of it, and that's relative safety, right? Like and
Yeah.
using our orientation skills to go right now in this moment, like there's no tiger about to jump out at me. So like there's
Mhm.
relative safety.
Mhm.
But to me, the purpose of these tools isn't finding safety, it's about creating resilience. And,
Mm.
Kathy Kane's work has been huge for me in that. She and I can't remember the co-author, they wrote
Oh,
Nourishing Resilience.
Stephen Terrell, I
Thank
believe.
you, Stephen
Yeah.
Terrell. And I that was such an insightful book for me, and I read that before I was doing my somatic experiencing training, but when I was
Oh.
doing my somatic movement training, and just what they went into with, like, the experience of resilience and what that's like. Like, to me, that's the goal of this work, is
Yeah.
not to have a calm nervous system, but to have a nervous system that is flexible, that can move through these different
Yes.
states, that doesn't get stuck in any one state. That includes
Uh-huh.
getting stuck in everything is awesome and lovely and
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because that's when we get into the spiritual bypassing and emotional
Yeah.
bypassing.
Yes.
But that we
Yeah.
have nervous systems that can get angry, that can feel rage, and that don't
Uh-huh.
become defined by that, that can mobilize that rage into action and movement and into
Yeah.
connection, and, like, we are constantly moving and adapting,
Mm. Mhm.
right?
Two things. One, it just makes me think of how when you were talking about, yeah, being able to move our rage and like that's someone's inner work to do, and then that's our collective work to do of who is allowed to be angry. Like so important. But I was
Mhm,
thinking too about I like to think a lot in my trauma resolution work about right relationship and like right size. I mean, nothing is the wrong size. But when we're thinking about like being triggered and for our logical brain, maybe it doesn't make sense to have such a volcano of a reaction when the bad thing isn't here right now, but maybe we caught the hint of something that reminds us of it. Um, but just thinking about yeah, like we wanna be in right relationship with what's happening in our lives, and sometimes that means we don't get to hang out and venture all the time, and we have to move into a survival response. Yeah, but being able to have that fluidity to move, and then knowing, like, for a and I don't love actually the language of, like, a healthy nervous system, but, like, for a functional nervous system, when we're hanging out somewhere, it's because we need to be there to get through the moments.
mhm,
And it's really interesting, in my safe and sound protocol work, a lot of people worry, like, that they will do the work to nourish their nervous system and, like, repattern their survival responses, and they will lose all of their protective parts, and their hypervigilance will go all the way away. Um, that doesn't happen, at least in the way I offer it, but it's just was coming up as you were speaking too, that, like, that can't be the goal, like, we these are all states that have such purpose and such brilliance, but yeah, not being able to live there, just being able to visit when we need to, I think for me also that feels like I'm so excited about that, and when people can make moves within a session or within an
mhm,
SSP group
mhm.
and I can see, "Oh, in real time, there's some fluidity here."
Yeah.
Um yeah, and when there's not, that tells us something as well. Probably tells us there was a time where, the nervous system learned this is where I hang out to find safety. So yeah, I just love the part of the work, like getting to unshame where folks hang out, because often we have a lot of shame for the places we go really quickly or the places we feel pretty stuck.
Yeah, that when we were in our SE training, the word that was often used was coherence, in
Yeah.
terms of, like, when the nervous system's in a good space. I find it's more useful to think about congruence. Because I'm
Mhm.
like, is that response congruent with what's happening? And, you know,
Mhm.
last year I started a course on courageous conversations, which was basically a somatic deep dive into what happens during conflict and like how we develop those skills to hold what we are experiencing that is a real congruent response and navigate it so that it doesn't disrupt the relationship. so that we
Mhm.
can still be present in it, in the relationship, while being present in that very congruent response, such as
Mm.
getting pissed off or being too scared
Mhm.
to, like, step back in. So, and I'll probably teach that course again this summer, but it was
Yay.
so lovely to play with just how de-shaming it is to realize this is a congruent response and that my nervous system maybe wasn't allowing itself to go there, or was putting a lid on it, or had
Mhm.
some other place it had learned to go to instead. And to come back into that congruent space, I feel like that's so valuable, especially right now. There's a lot of things that should be pissing us off.
Yeah. Mhm.
And how do we step into that anger with congruence,
Mhm.
right? And I always think of like the hybrid state of, can I be angry and can I still be connected at the same time?
Yeah.
Because when anger
Mhm.
loses empathy, right? And empathy is that quality of the ventral vagal system. Anger is one of those qualities of self-assertion that comes up in the sympathetic nervous system. When anger loses connection to empathy, that's when bad things happen.
Mm.
But as long as we can navigate our way in anger congruently and also stay in connection, then really good things can happen.
Mm. Yeah, more of that, please. Our world needs it right now.
Jess, I wanna honor your time and everybody else's time. Is there anything else you wanna add in? And maybe you wanna share, like, how people can find you and your Safe and Sound protocol
Oh,
groups that are happening?
yeah. I have 2 spring Safe and Sound protocol groups. One starts March 11th and one starts April 6th, and we have just a couple spots in the March 11th group. And these are really small. It's 4 to 6 people. We meet on Zoom for 13 weeks. It's a very queer and neurodivergent affirming and chronic pain, like showing up from bed, affirming kind of a space. Yeah, and we listen to the SSP playlist, and I weave in some somatics and go on some nerdy tangents. Yeah, those are the 2 things. My client books are full right now, which is such a great feeling. So SSP groups are a great way to be involved. And I'll just say for folks who are like, I don't know about being in my body, there's a lot of pain in there. Like the SSP can be such a great bridge if that feels like a big ask to be connecting with your body. And I won't grill you about where do you feel it in your body. Pinky promise. Yeah, and I'm on Instagram and softpathhealing.com, and that's also my Instagram. We should do this again. It was so fun.
This was so much fun. Thank you so much, Jess.
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
I so appreciate what you bring to the world and to this work and to this field, and, it's a delight to be in relationship, in this professional relationship and friendship with
Yes.
you.
Yeah, are you feeling ventral? I feel so ventral.
I feel so ventral. I feel very, like, warm and fuzzy, but also, like, a little bit of that gentle, playful, sympathetic mobilization.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yay. Yeah, I'm so glad you're here too. The field needs us. That's what I'll say about that.
More queer somatic practitioners.
Yes, please. Oh,
On
thank you,
that
Mel.
note, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.